There are few works in contemporary television that manage to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary with such audacity as Aida. The series, on the surface, is a social comedy set in the working-class neighborhood of Esperanza Sur. But beneath its layers of humor, vulgarity, and absurdity lies a sharp commentary on Spanish identity, gender roles, and the fragility of dignity in the face of economic struggle. The theme of Casting Power 2 serves as both a metaphor and an analysis of how Aida became a phenomenon, not simply because of its scripts, but because of the ensemble cast that turned imperfection into emotional power. To understand its brilliance, one must look beyond the jokes and recognize how its casting, writing, and cultural timing created a mirror that Spain could not look away from. From its first episodes, Aida introduced an ecosystem of characters that represented not archetypes, but contradictions. Aida Garcia, the protagonist, was a single mother, a cleaner, a woman without illusions, yet full of fierce tenderness. Her strength was not glamorous, but raw. Her laughter often carried the weight of exhaustion. The casting of Carmen Machi was not a coincidence. It was a stroke of realism that television rarely dares. In her eyes, the audience saw the fatigue of 1,000 unpaid bills, but also the stubborn fire of someone who refuses to be erased. The secondary characters, from Mauricio the sexist bar owner to Luisma the foolish but kind-hearted brother, formed a community that resembled more a circus of failures than a sitcom family. Yet through that chaotic collection of voices, the show built its social critique. The humor was crude, the language peppered with slang, but the emotion was undeniable. When Luisma looked at his sister with childlike innocence, or when Chema, the intellectual grocer, tried to maintain moral order amid chaos, the audience saw themselves reflected in their contradictions. Casting Power 2 is about that chemistry, about the invisible architecture of performance that made this show endure far beyond its comedic format. Watching Aida is like entering a theater, where every line has a double meaning, where every exaggerated gesture hides a silent cry. The directors understood this perfectly. They filmed with intimacy, not grandeur. The camera lingered on faces, often letting the discomfort speak. Scenes in the bar were staged not as sitcom set pieces, but as social microcosms. Behind the laughter, there was a sense of claustrophobia, of people trapped in repetition. Aida's endless efforts to improve her life, only to be dragged back by her circumstances, captured the emotional cycle of working-class survival. One could laugh, but it was the kind of laughter that tightens the chest. The brilliance of Aida lies also in how it refused to idealize its characters. They were selfish, petty, often cruel, yet their flaws were presented with a compassion rarely seen in television. The writers, aware of the stereotypes they were playing with, allowed moments of tenderness to slip through. For instance, when Aida sacrifices her own needs to protect her children, or when Luisma's stupidity suddenly gives way to unexpected wisdom, the tone changes subtly. The laughter fades and silence speaks. It is in those pauses that the show transcends genre and becomes something closer to social poetry. In many ways, Aida can be compared to Shameless or Roseanne, but its rhythm and tone are distinctly Spanish. The humor of Esperanza Sur is born from the streets, from linguistic rhythm, from the defiant irony that people use to survive poverty. What makes the show universal, however, is its humanity. The actors embody lives that oscillate between farce and tragedy. Casting Power 2 reminds us that great performances are not about transformation, but about exposure. Each actor reveals a piece of themselves, creating a collective vulnerability that becomes contagious. Watching Carmen Machi and Paco León share a scene feels like watching two instruments in perfect dissonance. She carries the weight of realism. He plays the melody of absurdity. Together, they form the tone of the series. Tragicomic, unpredictable, sincere. The chemistry extends to the rest of the cast, forming an ensemble where no role is secondary. Even the smallest character has an emotional arc. Even the loudest joke hides a truth. The writing of Aida never aimed for moral lessons, but instead built a world where contradictions coexist without resolution. The laughter that follows a scene of despair is not accidental. It is the only defense mechanism left to these characters. When viewed from this lens, the show becomes an anthropology of Spanish life in the 2000s. The economic precarity, the gender tensions, the generational frustration all appear through humor. The neighborhood bar becomes a parliament of the forgotten, where every conversation mixes gossip with philosophy. Mauricio's machismo is not only comic exaggeration, but a portrait of a culture that struggles to evolve. Chema's moral speeches reveal the impotence of intellectual ideals in a world ruled by necessity. The children of Aida, growing up amid this chaos, embody the next cycle of repetition. Casting Power 2 also reflects on the politics of performance itself. Casting is power because representation defines memory. The faces we see on screen shape our perception of reality. Aida dared to populate television with bodies that defied aesthetic norms, with accents, wrinkles, and imperfections. It was revolutionary in its ordinariness. The audience recognized themselves not in fantasy, but in truth. There was no need for exoticism or glamour. The power of the show lay in its honesty. Even its humor, sometimes politically incorrect, worked as a mirror of collective hypocrisy. To laugh at Aida was to laugh at oneself, at one's own compromises and pretensions. From a personal perspective, the first time I watched Aida, I remember feeling uneasy. I had expected light entertainment, but found something closer to confession. The dialogues, while comedic, carried echoes of conversations I had overheard in real neighborhoods. There was a familiarity that both comforted and disturbed me. As the seasons progressed, I began to realize that the show's genius was not in its plot lines, but in its consistency. Life, after all, rarely changes dramatically. Aida cleans, struggles, forgives, fails, and starts again. That repetition is the show's philosophy, survival as performance. The actors understood this perfectly, turning monotony into art. The later seasons, even after Carmen Machi's departure, continued to explore this idea. The absence of the main character became a metaphor for the void left by those who carry families, communities, and societies on their shoulders. The ensemble learned to function without its core, and that in itself was a powerful commentary on resilience. Casting Power 2 can therefore be read as a metaphor for the survival of art under constraint. Just as Aida's characters make do with what they have, the series built meaning through limited settings and modest production. Its emotional scale, however, was enormous. The laughter, the tears, the music, the rhythm of its editing all worked together to create a symphony of chaos and tenderness. Watching Aida today feels like revisiting a photograph of a time that is both distant and current. The jokes still land, but the social context now adds layers of melancholy. The Spain of Esperanza Sur is not gone. It has simply changed costume. The precariousness, the dreams, the contradictions remain. That is the ultimate proof of the show's relevance. It captured not an era, but a condition. In the end, Casting Power 2 is a study of empathy disguised as comedy. It reminds us that power is not about control, but about connection. The cast of Aida created a world where laughter became resistance, where imperfection turned into beauty, and where television achieved what cinema often forgets, the power to reflect life without embellishment. When the final credits roll, one is left not with punchlines but with faces that feel real, flawed, human. And perhaps that is the true casting power, the ability to make us believe that these characters exist beyond the screen, still arguing, still loving, still surviving somewhere in Esperanza Sur.